I found my brother's notebook after our parents died. It uncovered a dark family pact, Reddit stories. They say blood is thicker than water, that family is the bond that holds you steady through storms, that no matter what happens in life, you can always return home and be safe. That's what I believed, or rather, that's what I was told to believe. But beliefs are fragile things. They shatter under pressure, especially when you start tugging at the loose threads of your family's past. Before I tell you what happened, you need to understand where I came from. Picture a modest two-story house nestled in a quiet neighborhood of sprawling oaks and cracked sidewalks. My childhood unfolded within those walls, every memory neatly boxed into rooms with floral wallpaper and worn-out wooden floors that creaked when you stepped just right. My parents were old-fashioned, especially my mother. She believed in order, in routine, in silence. Love, in our house, wasn't loud or demonstrative. It was a plate of hot food slid across the table. It was my father mowing the lawn every Saturday at 8:300 a.m. sharp. It was my mother's perfume lingering in the hallway long after she'd passed by without a word. We weren't unhappy, but we weren't close either. There were no bedtime stories, no spontaneous hugs, no family game nights. Just structure, just duty, just the echo of lives being lived side by side, not together. Still, I didn't question it. I didn't know any different. My older brother, James, was the one who always pushed boundaries. He'd sneak out, stay out too late, come back reeking of rebellion. My parents were harder on him, maybe because they saw their own youth slipping away through his recklessness. Maybe because they knew he saw something they didn't want him to see. Or maybe it was because of what he found. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The summer James turned 19, he left without saying goodbye. One morning, he was gone. No note, no message, just silence. My parents said he'd gone off to start his life, that it was time. But the way they said it, tight-lipped, eyes flickering with something too slippery to name, it never sat right with me. I was only 14 then, and I didn't have the courage to ask questions. But I felt the hole he left behind like a vacuum in the middle of our house. My parents never spoke of him again. It was as if he'd been erased, like a photo removed from an album, like a name scratched off a tombstone. I grew up. I did what I was supposed to. I went to college, got a job, visited on holidays. Every time I returned, the house felt more distant, like it was rejecting me, like the walls themselves were uncomfortable with my presence. My father passed away when I was 27. Heart attack, sudden and clean. My mother followed 2 years later, after a long, slow decline into silence. She spoke less and less until her voice was just a whisper of disapproval or worry. When she was gone, I was left with the house. The house and a key. A small, brass key that didn't match any door I remembered. I found it in a sealed envelope tucked behind a drawer in her dresser, marked only with my name in her careful, looping script. That was the beginning of everything. I moved back in temporarily, to sort things out, to decide whether to sell it or keep it. The place felt frozen in time, like my parents had never left. Their coats still hung by the door. Their slippers sat neatly by the bed. Dust covered everything, but the structure remained, like they were still living within the framework of routine, even in death. For days, I wandered the halls, opening cabinets, drawers, boxes of old photos. I was trying to connect with something. Maybe a sense of closure. Maybe a trace of who they'd been before silence swallowed them. But it wasn't until I returned to the basement that the memories started to flicker in a different light. The basement had always creeped me out as a kid. It was dim and cluttered, full of shadowed corners and the smell of damp concrete. My father kept it locked most of the time, saying it was dangerous with all the tools and chemicals he stored down there. I remember him spending long hours behind that locked door, hammering or drilling or just doing something. At the time, I never thought to question it. But now, with the whole house under my control, I took the opportunity to explore. The brass key didn't fit the basement door. It had always been unlocked since my parents passed. But once I was inside, I noticed something odd. There was a section of wall behind the shelves that didn't match the rest. The wood was newer, lighter, and the air around it felt wrong. Almost hollow. I pulled the shelves aside and found a narrow panel, flush against the wall, barely noticeable. No handle, just a small circular hole the size of a pencil eraser. I stared at it for a long time before I remembered the key. It slid in perfectly. With a soft click, the panel opened inward, revealing a hidden passage no wider than a closet. A chill ran down my spine. I stood there for what felt like hours, heart pounding, trying to decide if I should go in. Eventually, curiosity won. I stepped inside, ducking to avoid the low ceiling. The passage led to a small room, more like a chamber really, with stone walls and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. It was cold, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper and mildew. In the center was a table. On the table, a stack of notebooks. I approached, hands trembling, and picked up the top one. It was James's handwriting. I knew it immediately. The same scrawl I'd seen on his school papers, his letters to Santa, his angry teenage notes left around the house. I opened it. The first line made my blood run cold. If you're reading this, then they're both dead. And maybe, just maybe, now you'll believe me. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there with that notebook in my hands, as if the words might change if I stared long enough. The dust danced in the shaft of light from the single bulb, and the silence in the room felt alive, pressing against my skin, breathing beside me. My brother, James, had written something he never meant our parents to see, and now that they were both gone, it was left for me. My hands were trembling when I turned the page. This room isn't what it seems. The next line read, none of this house is. If you grew up here, like I did, then you've probably always felt it too. That sense that something's off, like a faint itch under your skin you can't scratch. I don't know where to begin, so I'll start with the night everything changed. I read through page after page, each word etched with a desperation that made my chest tighten. He described things I barely remembered or had dismissed at the time. The way our parents whispered in the kitchen late at night, long after they thought we were asleep. The smell of bleach that lingered for days even when no cleaning had been done. The locked trunk in the attic that no one was ever allowed to touch. He remembered waking up to strange sounds. Low, guttural noises beneath the floorboards, and the soft humming of our mother coming from somewhere she wasn't. James wrote about how he'd started keeping notes when he was 16. He thought he was going crazy. He questioned if it was stress, hallucinations, sleep paralysis. But the more he watched, the more he noticed patterns. The flickering of the hallway light exactly 3 times before the knocking began. The way our father always turned the mirror in the upstairs hallway to face the wall before bed. The way our mother recited a single sentence under her breath every time she touched the old rotary phone in the kitchen. He sees what we leave behind. He saw me once, James wrote, looking at her while she said it. She'd frozen mid-movement, then smiled in that tight, unnatural way and said she was praying. I believed her. Of course I did. She was my mother. He wrote about finding an old blueprint of the house buried in one of Dad's toolboxes. The layout didn't match. There were rooms marked that didn't exist. Hidden spaces, passages. He followed the clues one by one until he found the door in the basement. The same one I had just opened with the key. James had been here. He had stood in this room. He had seen whatever it was that lived inside our house beneath the surface of normalcy. But what truly shattered my sense of reality wasn't what he described. It was what he said next. I think they made a deal, he wrote. Mom and Dad. Before we were born. I think they gave something away. Or got something back. And I think part of that deal was us. I read those lines over and over. Gave something away. Got something back. Us. My stomach turned cold. It sounded impossible. Like the ravings of a paranoid mind. But the longer I sat in that stone room, surrounded by James's notebooks, dozens of them filled with his slanted, frantic handwriting, the more the pieces started to click together. Memories I hadn't thought about in years resurfaced like ghosts. The time I fell down the stairs and broke my wrist, and my mother didn't take me to a hospital. She just held my arm, whispered something, and the pain stopped. The way our neighbor's cat, the one that always hissed at my father, disappeared without a trace. The time I swore I saw someone standing in my closet, but when I screamed, my parents didn't come. And when I told them the next morning, they looked at each other for a long time before saying I must have dreamed it. James believed there was something underneath our family. A truth buried so deep, wrapped in generations of secrecy, that even he couldn't quite define it. But he knew it was real, and he believed our parents were protecting it, or hiding it, from the world, or from us. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I stayed in the basement, flipping through notebook after notebook, each one a descent into madness. Or clarity, depending on how you looked at it. Some pages were just drawings. Symbols I didn't recognize, patterns that made my eyes ache if I stared too long. One page had a list. James, it read. Lydia. Replacements. Cycles. He doesn't like noise. He remembers pain. Stay in the light. Lydia. My name. My breath caught in my throat. How long had he been tracking me? Watching me? Protecting me? Or warning me? I didn't know. But it was clear James hadn't just left because he was a rebellious teenager. He'd been running. Or hiding. Or both. And now I had stumbled right into whatever he'd been trying to avoid. The next morning, I went through the rest of the house with new eyes. I knocked on walls, measured spaces, looked for signs, and I found them. Faint markings in the closets, scratches on the underside of the dining room table, a pattern of nails driven into the floorboards beneath my childhood bed in the shape of a spiral. There was one more thing James mentioned. The mirror. He said if I wanted to know the truth, really know it, I had to use the mirror in the upstairs hallway. The one our father always turned to the wall at night. Wait until the house is silent, he wrote. Make sure no light is on. Stand in front of the mirror. Don't look into it. Just hold your gaze a few inches below the glass. You'll feel it. When it's time, you'll know. And when you finally look, do not speak. That night I waited. I sat on the stairs until the silence was complete. No cars, no creaks, nothing. I turned off the last light and stood before the mirror. The hallway stretched long behind me, swallowed in darkness. I focused just below the reflective surface. I felt it immediately, a subtle shift, like the air thickened, like gravity twisted. My vision blurred. And then it came, a soft vibration under my feet, a hum too low to hear but deep enough to feel in my bones. The mirror began to fog, though there was no heat, no breath. I looked, and for a fraction of a second, I saw not my reflection, but a room, a different room, one I'd never seen, and in it stood a man with no eyes. His face was mine, but older, gaunt, his mouth opened slowly. But I remembered James's warning. I didn't speak, the vision vanished. The hallway returned. My knees buckled. I hit the floor, gasping. I didn't sleep for the next 2 days. I didn't eat. I just sat in the living room, lights on, watching the corners of the house like they might crawl closer if I blinked. And that's when I found the second notebook. It wasn't in the basement. It was behind a loose brick in the fireplace. This one was addressed to me by name. Lydia, if you've made it this far, then you know I'm not crazy. You know something is wrong, but you don't know everything. Not yet. There's more. And you need to be ready before you learn it. Because once you know, you can't unknow. And once he knows you know, he starts watching you too. I closed the notebook and stared into the cold ashes of the fireplace, trying to understand what heat meant. Who was he? And what had my parents done? What had they unleashed? Whatever it was, it had something to do with our family, with James, with me. And the terrifying part was, I hadn't even scratched the surface. I didn't leave the house for the next 5 days. Not because I couldn't, but because something told me I shouldn't. Every time I approached the front door, something shifted in the air, subtle but undeniable. like a breath held in just before something is said or a warning right before a storm. I told myself it was paranoia, the kind of creeping fear that seeps into your skin when you've been alone too long, steeped in journals filled with the writings of someone who may have been unraveling. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. The house was watching me now. Or more precisely, he was. I kept thinking about the man I'd seen in the mirror. My face, but older. And those hollow sockets where his eyes should have been. Something about him felt ancient, as though he'd been there long before me, and somehow was still waiting, patient and cruel. James had called him Heech with a capital H, and that alone was enough to send a chill crawling through me. Whatever or whoever this entity was, James believed it had influence over our family, and if his notes were right, my parents had made some kind of pact. But what kind of deal involved hiding secret rooms in basements and nailing symbols under their child's bed? I needed answers, not fragments. Not eerie half-memories or cryptic warnings. Real answers. So I returned to the one place in the house I hadn't yet dared to enter since coming back, the attic. Growing up, the attic had been a forbidden zone. My father kept the door padlocked and always claimed it was unsafe. Old wood, bad insulation, loose boards, he'd say whenever James or I asked about it. Once, when I was 9, I caught a glimpse inside when he opened the hatch briefly. I remember the outline of a trunk. Big, black. Heavy-looking. But that's all I saw before he snapped the door shut. And then it was forgotten, the way most things in that house were. Buried under routines, silence, and glances that never quite met your eyes. Now, standing beneath that hatch, I realized the padlock was gone. Either someone had removed it or, more likely, my father had taken it with him to the grave. I pulled the cord and the ladder creaked down. Dust rained from the ceiling like ancient ash. I climbed up slowly, flashlight in hand, half expecting to find nothing but cobwebs and boxes of old tax forms. What I found instead made my blood run cold. The attic was empty except for the trunk. It sat dead center, as though placed there deliberately waiting. Its surface was charred black, as if it had been pulled from a fire. The metal clasps were rusted but intact. There were no markings on it, no handles, just a box that radiated wrongness. Every instinct screamed at me not to open it. But James had left me too many breadcrumbs, and I couldn't stop now. I crouched in front of it and slowly unlatched the clasps. They opened with a groan that sounded like something exhaling after a long sleep. The lid resisted at first, then gave way with a reluctant creak. Inside was a book, not a notebook like the others. This one was leather-bound, thick, old. The pages were yellowed, brittle, and smelled faintly of something metallic, like blood. I lifted it out and saw that it wasn't written in English. The symbols looked hand-drawn, not printed. They twisted and looped in ways that hurt my eyes if I stared too long. But interspersed throughout the book were sketches, disturbing ones. Human faces stretched in agony. Creatures with too many limbs, eyes. So many eyes, drawn in clusters, in spirals, embedded in walls, in trees, in faces. And on the final page, a diagram that showed our house, but beneath it, cavernals, chambers, and at the very bottom, a name, Thales. I didn't know what it meant. I wasn't even sure it was a name. But the moment I read it, a sound echoed through the attic floor, a single, sharp knock. From below, I dropped the book and scrambled to the hatch, nearly tumbling down the ladder. When I hit the ground floor, I held my breath. Silence. And then, again, a knock. This time from the basement, 3 knocks, slow. Deliberate. Something was awake. I rushed to the basement door and pressed my ear against it. Nothing. I unlocked it and swung it open. The stairs yawned downward into darkness, but I knew better than to go down again right then. Not after what I had just awakened. Instead, I returned to the fireplace and retrieved James's second notebook. I needed more context. I needed something to tether myself to reality, because I was starting to feel unmoored, like I was slipping sideways into a version of my life that had always existed just beneath the surface. James's writing had changed in this notebook. It was less frantic, more focused, almost clinical. He was studying the house now, studying him. He wrote about hearing whispers through the walls, about finding his own name written inside his pillowcase seam, stitched in red thread, about the way certain objects in the house seemed to vanish and reappear slightly altered. An old photograph with a missing figure, a painting that changed subtly from day to day. And he wrote about Thales. According to James, Thales wasn't just an entity. He was a presence tied to the land itself, something ancient, buried and bound. Our house wasn't built by accident, it was chosen, or summoned. The family that owned it before us disappeared in 1949. No records, no survivors. The house was sold to our grandparents for a fraction of its value, and whatever bargain was struck then, it carried forward. Through our parents, and now to us. James had theories. He believed Thales required sacrifice, not always blood, but something personal, identity, sanity, memory. Our parents had given him something, and in return, they got us, or they got the illusion of a normal family. One where the children never questioned why mirrors were turned, or why the doors sometimes opened to rooms that weren't there the day before. James claimed the house existed in layers, some visible, some only accessible under the right conditions. Silence, darkness, the mirror. He said he'd seen them all. And in one of them, he saw our parents, not as they were in life, but as hollowed-out versions of themselves. Puppets. Shells. And worst of all, he saw what happened to him. He wrote that one night, the door in the basement opened by itself, and he was pulled through, not by hands, by need. He said Thales feeds on potential. He latches onto the moments in your life where a choice is made, where you could become one thing or another, and he devours what could have been. He doesn't kill you. He leaves you alive, but emptied, unmade from the inside out. James escaped, but not unscathed. He said he had only a few years left before Thales found him again. Because once you've been claimed, you're never truly free. The final page of the notebook had one sentence. You'll have to choose, Lydia. Just like I did, either leave now and forget everything, or stay and finish what I started. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the center of the living room, surrounded by notebooks, drawings, blueprints, and that ancient leather-bound book. The house was quiet, but not empty, and I knew one thing with absolute certainty. James hadn't run away. He'd hidden. From Thales, from our parents. And now it was my turn. That night, I finally understood the kind of silence James had warned me about. It wasn't peaceful or still. It was hungry. The house held its breath around me, like it knew I was closer than anyone had ever been to peeling back the last layer. I didn't sleep. I didn't dare. Instead, I arranged everything I had on the dining room table like pieces of a deranged jigsaw puzzle: the notebooks, the cryptic diagrams, the blueprint with its missing rooms, and the leather-bound book with its swirling symbols and impossible language. The word. Thales stared at me from every corner of my mind, a name that felt more like a wound than a word. I knew I couldn't keep circling this thing forever. If I wanted the truth, I had to confront it. I had to go down in the hidden layer James had spoken of. The space beneath the basement. The place he had once been pulled into and somehow escaped. That's where it all started, and where it had to end. I waited until the sun dipped below the trees and shadows took their rightful place in the corners of the house. I turned every light off, just as James had instructed in his warnings. I made sure no noise remained. No television, no ticking clocks, not even the hum of the refrigerator. Then I made my way to the basement. It was colder than I remembered, though I hadn't adjusted the thermostat in days. Each step creaked in protest as I descended. I reached the small stone room where I'd found James's first notebook. It was darker now, as if the shadows had thickened since my last visit. But something was different. The far wall, which I had thought solid, was ajar, as if waiting for me to notice it. Behind it lay a staircase. A spiral one, narrow and steep, carved out of something that didn't feel like stone. The walls around it were slick and pulsing faintly, like skin just beneath the surface of a wound. I descended with a flashlight, careful not to touch the walls. My heart beat louder with each step. Not just from fear, but from something older. Recognition. Like a part of me had been here before. At the bottom was a vast chamber. It shouldn't have been there. It couldn't have. The entire house sat atop a suburban plot barely big enough for a backyard garden, and yet here was a space that seemed to stretch forever in all directions. The ceiling was lost in shadow. The walls throbbed with a slow, wet rhythm. In the center stood a pedestal made of dark stone, slick with condensation. On it, a small mirror. I approached cautiously. As I stepped closer, the air around me grew thicker, like walking through syrup. My flashlight flickered, then died, but the mirror remained illuminated, somehow glowing from within. I saw myself in it, but not quite. This version of me looked hollow. Her skin was slightly off color, and her eyes were distant, sunken, as if they'd seen something the body was still trying to forget. She stared at me. Then, slowly, her lips parted, and I heard my own voice, not from my mouth, but from the mirror. "You should not have come." The voice echoed in the chamber. Though I hadn't spoken, my knees nearly gave out. I wanted to turn and run. But something in the mirror, me's eyes held me still. Not just fear. Recognition. A silent understanding that we were linked. That what had happened to James was starting to happen to me. "I am what's left," the mirror, me said. "Of you. The piece you don't even know you lost." Diane, suddenly I remembered. A moment when I was 6 years old, standing at the edge of the woods behind our house. I had wandered off chasing a red balloon that wasn't mine. I tripped, fell, hit my head. When I opened my eyes, everything was dark and cold. I was alone for what felt like hours. And then, I was home again. My parents said they found me wandering in the kitchen, dazed. I never thought about it again. But that moment came rushing back now, full and terrible in its clarity. That was the moment Thales had marked me then. Taken something, a sliver, a fragment of my soul, and now he wanted the rest. I backed away from the pedestal. The walls began to pulse faster, as if the room itself had become excited. From the shadows beyond, something stirred, something tall. It didn't walk. It slithered, glided, moved without motion. Eyes bloomed along the walls, blinking in perfect unison. And in the air around me, a voice spoke. Not in sound, but directly into my thoughts. "You are the last. You are the offering." I stumbled back up the stairs, nearly slipping in the dark. My hands scraped the walls, which felt alive and hot. The voice followed me, threading itself through my spine, a needle of thought pushing deeper with every step. Come back and be whole." I slammed the door shut when I reached the basement. My breath came in short gasps, but I didn't stop. I ran back to the dining room, scattering the notebooks. I searched for something, anything that could help. That's when I saw it, a page in James's handwriting with a single instruction I hadn't noticed before. To end him, you must break the chain. I had no idea what the chain was, not metaphorically, but literally, what chain? There were no chains in that chamber. No bindings. Just the mirror. The mirror, could that be it? I grabbed the closest heavy object I could find, an old iron fireplace poker, and ran back downstairs. The house groaned around me, the floorboards flexing beneath my feet like something was trying to rise from below. I didn't hesitate. I raced to the chamber, straight to the pedestal, and without a second thought, brought the poker down onto the mirror. The glass shattered, and everything changed. The light in the chamber died instantly. The heartbeat of the walls stopped. A scream, not a sound, but a sensation, ripped through the air. And for a moment, everything was still. Then the chamber began to collapse. The walls imploded, folding in on themselves, dragging the darkness back into whatever space it had leaked from. I turned and sprinted, the stairs crumbling behind me as I climbed. I burst into the basement and slammed the secret door shut just as the ground beneath it collapsed inward, leaving only silence. Real silence. Not the kind that waits and watches. The kind that comes after a storm. I collapsed onto the basement floor and wept. Not out of fear, but relief. The presence was gone. I couldn't feel him anymore. The weight that had clung to the walls of the house had lifted. But I wasn't whole. Not yet, because James was still missing. I didn't believe he was dead. Not anymore. If Thales had taken a part of me when I was 6, he had taken more from James. But James had escaped once. Maybe he could again. Maybe I could bring him back. There was one more notebook. I found it hidden inside a hollowed-out book on the living room shelf. It was newer, fresher. The ink was dark, the handwriting steadier. James had written it recently. If you're reading this, it means you broke the mirror. Good. But the house is still hungry. The deal isn't broken, it's just waiting. You need to find the original contract. It's not in this house. It never was. It's buried with her. You know who? And just like that, a new name came to mind. Grandmother. The one no one talked about. The one we never visited. The one buried in the family plot that no one tended. The story wasn't over. Not even close. I didn't waste time. As soon as I read that last line, it's buried with her. You know who? I knew exactly where I needed to go. There was only one grave in our family that had remained unvisited, unspoken of, and mysteriously unmarked. My grandmother's, not my mother's mother, the sweet, forgettable woman whose floral blouses and cookies had faded into memory. But my father's, the one no one ever mentioned, the one whose photograph had vanished from every family album by the time I was 10. Her name was Editha Thorne, and when I was young, I asked my father about her once. His face changed. He looked at me like I'd asked about a corpse that never stopped twitching. All he said was, "She died before you were born. Leave it at that." But now I knew better. She hadn't just died. She had been erased. The cemetery wasn't far. Small, forgotten patch of land off a narrow road that twisted through the woods like a finger beckoning toward secrets. It wasn't maintained by the city anymore. Vines tangled over crooked headstones. The fence was rusted through in places. I parked at the edge, the engine ticking in the sudden quiet. Something about the air here felt wrong, like it carried a hum just below the frequency of hearing. The trees didn't sway, though the wind tugged at my jacket. I walked through the rusted gate, stepping over twisted roots that jutted up like grasping hands. I passed the familiar headstones first. My parents, still bare and clean. Distant cousins, great aunts. Names I knew, faces I didn't. And then I found it. The farthest grave in the back corner, behind a crumbling stone angel with no eyes. No headstone. Just a flat, rectangular slab of concrete. No inscription. Just moss. She was here. I cleared the moss away with my sleeve. Nothing. No date. No epitaph. Just silence. But when I knocked on the slab with my knuckles, 3 times like the basement door, it rang hollow. I stared at it, pulse quickening. If James was right, the original contract, the one that began all of this, was buried with her. But what did that mean? A document, a relic, a memory. I didn't have tools, so I used the tire iron from my car to dig along the edges. The earth fought me. Roots blood sap that stained my skin black. Worms crawled away from me as if I carried fire. My hands blistered, bled. I didn't stop. I couldn't. After hours, I heard the scrape of metal against metal. A latch. There was a box beneath the slab. Not a coffin. Something older, an iron-bound chest, shaped like a small trunk, etched with symbols I recognized from the leather-bound book. The air around it buzzed faintly, like static. I braced myself and opened it. Inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth, was a book. Not just any book. This one pulsed. It beat like a heart, softly as if it were alive. It was smaller than the one from the attic, but heavier. Its cover was made of something I refused to believe was human skin. On the front, etched in scorched letters, was one word. Accord. The moment I touched it, the trees shifted. The hum in the air stopped. The entire cemetery seemed to exhale. I clutched the book to my chest and ran back to my car, not daring to open it there. I needed to be back at the house, surrounded by everything James had left me, ready to face what this was. Back home, I placed the book on the dining table and stared at it for a long time. Then I opened it. The pages were dry and stiff, but they turned easily as if welcoming me. The text inside was a mix of languages. Some I recognized, most I didn't. But James had anticipated this. Tucked inside was a sheet of lined notebook paper in his handwriting, translating the first few pages. It was a pact. Not just with Thales, but with them. Plural. The original inhabitants of something called the Beneath. Entities older than language, older than sin. They weren't gods. They weren't demons. They were architects, engineers of possibility, and they dealt not in blood but in trade. The contract outlined terms. In exchange for prosperity, security, and continuation of bloodline, the family, our family, agreed to offer something intangible every generation, the potential of one. That meant every generation, someone from the bloodline would be marked. Not killed, not sacrificed in the way we imagine, but emptied, hollowed, their potential. Every road they might have taken, every life they could have lived, would be consumed. James was the chosen one of our generation. But he fought it, and when he did, it passed to me. But I had found the accord, and James believed it could be severed. There were instructions, scribbled in James's urgent script beneath the translation. You have to go back into the chamber. You have to bring the accord. Burn it. But not with fire. With choice. That word again. A choice. James always said Thales devoured potential. But potential only exists where choice exists. Without choice, there's no future to steal. So I had to make a choice. A real one. Not survival. Not fear. A choice of who I was going to be. And I had to make it in the one place where no identity was safe. The chamber. It wasn't gone. I knew at the moment I opened the basement door. The walls were quiet now, but the door behind the stone panel creaked open without resistance. The spiral stairs returned, as if waiting. This time, I brought nothing but the accord. At the bottom, the chamber had changed. No longer pulsing or screaming, it was empty and cold. At the center, the pedestal remained, but instead of a mirror, there was a flame. Small, blue, flickering. The kind of fire that doesn't burn the skin but memory. I understood what I had to do. I placed the accord above the flame, but it didn't catch, it simply hovered. And a voice, James's voice, spoke in my mind. You have to choose who you are. Only then will he lose interest. The problem was, I didn't know who I was. I had lived my whole life according to expectations, rules, silence. I was a product of a house built on lies. How do you make a choice when you've never had one? So I did something terrifying. I closed my eyes, and I imagined the life I would have chosen if no curse, no house, no he had ever shaped me. I saw myself as a writer, a traveler, a woman who loved fiercely and spoke loudly and laughed without restraint. I saw myself free. The flame rose. The accord ignited. The pages curled inward, symbols writhing and screaming in silence as they turned to ash. The chamber began to shake, and I felt him scream. Not in sound, in absence. Thales wasn't dead, but I was no longer his. The light swallowed the chamber. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in the basement. The passage was gone. The wall was whole, and in my hand was a single page from the accord, blank. Later that night, I found a note tucked inside one of the notebooks. I had missed it before. It was in James's handwriting, but not frantic. Calm, centered. You did it, didn't? I felt it. Wherever I am, something's different. Maybe we both get to be free now. If I find a way back, I'll leave a sign. Something small. Something only you'd notice. Until then, live the life he couldn't take from you. It was signed with a name he hadn't used since we were kids. Your brother, Jamie. That night, I slept without fear. But the story wasn't over. Because the next morning, there was a red balloon tied to the mailbox. The balloon shouldn't have been there. It swayed in the breeze, impossibly bright against the drab gray of morning, its ribbon curled neatly around the rusted post of the mailbox. No note. No tag. Just red, impossibly vivid, like it had been plucked from a dream, or a memory. A 6-year-old version of myself, chasing that same color into the woods. My first encounter. The day I was marked, I stood frozen on the porch, bathrobe fluttering in the wind, coffee cooling in my hand. I hadn't told anyone what had happened. How could I? How do you explain that your family made a pact with something beneath reality, and that you had somehow severed it, with an act of pure choice. That your brother might be lost in a layer of the world no one else could see. That something ancient and hungry might still be watching. The balloon bobbed once, twice, and popped. No sound, just gone. The ribbon fell to the ground, twisting, and landed in the shape of a spiral. I didn't go inside right away. I stood on the porch for a long time, trying to will myself into believing it was over, that the balloon was a coincidence, that Thales, whatever he truly was, had been bound by the burning of the accord. But even then, a whisper at the edge of my thoughts reminded me he doesn't need belief. He only needs memory. And some memories are sticky. I gathered the ribbon and brought it inside, set it on the dining table beside the blank page from the accord, the one piece that hadn't burned. It still pulsed faintly if I held it between my palms, like a dormant heart. I wrapped it in cloth and locked it away in the fireproof box with the rest of James's notebooks. I didn't burn them. I couldn't. They were the only proof that any of this had happened, and something told me they weren't done speaking yet. I tried after that to reclaim my life. I painted the house, soft greens and pale blues. I opened windows, played music. I found a job at a local bookshop and made coffee for strangers. I started writing, nothing about what had happened, not yet, but fiction. Short stories, ones with clear beginnings and endings. Unlike mine, I laughed more. Sometimes I even danced alone in the kitchen. For the first time, I was living a life that felt like my own. But at night, I still dreamed of him. Not James. Him. Thales, or whatever name that thing truly wore. Sometimes he had my father's face. Other nights he wore James's grin. Most often he looked like me, hollow-eyed, smiling, always just standing there, waiting. Then came the night I woke up with dirt under my fingernails. No memory of digging, no pain. Just dirt, as though I'd clawed my way out of something, or into it. I checked the fireproof box, still locked, the notebooks untouched. But the blank page from the accord had changed. There was writing now, not in ink, not in any language I knew. Just symbols, curling and pulsing faintly like I didn't touch it. I didn't breathe. I sat there for hours staring at it, knowing without knowing that something had shifted. The pact was broken. But the wound it left behind was still open. I took the page to the attic, where I had placed the burned fragments of the first mirror, the charred remains of the leather-bound book, the old blueprints with their impossible tunnels. And that's when I saw it. The trunk had returned. I had destroyed it, burned it in a fire so hot the house had nearly gone with it. But there it was, in the same spot, not a scorch mark in sight. And on top of it, a notebook. Not James's, mine. But I had never written it. Inside were pages and pages of my own handwriting, describing things I hadn't lived. Conversations I never had, a child I never bore, a husband who didn't exist, a life parallel to mine, brimming with moments that could have been, potential. I dropped the book, heart thudding, and remembered James's warning. He feeds on what could have been. So I ran, not from the house, not from the dream, from myself, from the part of me that wanted to open that notebook and read all 300 pages. Because I knew the truth. Once you look too long into the mirror of what might have been, you start to see yourself reflected in it. And then, slowly, you forget which version was ever real. But even knowing that, I couldn't destroy the notebook because it had one final page. And on it, written in bold block letters, were 4 words. He's still with James. I didn't sleep for days after that. I watched the notebook constantly, waiting for more words to appear, for more impossible truths to unfold. I whispered to the walls. Sometimes they whispered back. I went to James's room, untouched since the day he vanished. Still lined with posters of bands long broken up, books with yellowing pages, a clock frozen at 2:47 a.m. I sat on his bed and closed my eyes. If he's still with James, then James isn't lost. So I made a decision. I would go back. Not to the chamber. That door was closed, but to the space between. The place James had described in his notebooks, the layer of the house that appeared only when silence, memory, and intention aligned. I knew how to get there now. It wasn't about light or mirrors. It was about surrender. About letting go of who I thought I was and stepping fully into the question of who I might have been. It took 3 nights. On the third, I heard the knocking, not from the basement, from the closet in James's room. 3 soft knocks. I opened the door. Darkness, not empty, but deep. Thicker than shadow, the kind of dark that folds around you like skin. I stepped inside. The world shifted. There was no up or down, no floor or ceiling, just memory. I walked through moments, real ones and not. My mother teaching me how to braid hair. My father holding a child that wasn't me. James laughing with someone who looked like me but smiled differently. These weren't dreams. They were lives. Stolen ones, potentials orbed into Thales' infinite web of what if. And at the center of it all, a door. Wooden, carved with spirals. I pushed it open. He was there. James. Older, worn, but whole. He turned and his eyes widened. "Lydia," he said, voice cracking. I ran to him. He caught me, and for the first time in decades, we held each other without fear. "I thought," he began. "I found the accord," I whispered. "I ended it." He pulled back. "Then how are you here?" And before I could answer, the world rippled. Because I hadn't come alone, he had followed me. Thales, not in shape, not in sound, in absence. Everything around us began to unravel. The door melting, the memories flickering like broken film. "We have to choose," I said. "Right now? Who we are, not who we were supposed to be." James looked at me, understanding flashing in his eyes. "I'm your brother," he said. "Not their offering." "I'm not the marked child," I said. "I'm just me." But the world screamed. But it couldn't hold us anymore. We fell, or rose, it didn't matter. When I opened my eyes again, we were back in James's room. Real this time, he was beside me, breathing. Alev. The house was still. Truly still. We didn't speak for a long time. We didn't need to. Later, we burned the notebook from the trunk. We buried the blank page in the deepest part of the woods. We sealed the basement door with brick and cement. The mirror in the hallway, we smashed it to dust. And the house, it stayed quiet. Until one morning, weeks later, when James came into the kitchen holding a small object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully. It was a stone, perfectly round, etched with a spiral. On the bottom a date, June 24th, 2025, today. And underneath that, the last potential. But the spiral began to glow, and the air grew still again. But this time, we smiled. Because we were ready. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.